Something is missing from your yard, and it is not a product. It is not a feeder you have not bought yet, a seed blend you have not tried, or a placement you have not considered. Whatever you have invested in the visible, purchasable elements of backyard birding. The blue jays in your neighborhood are making their decisions based on something entirely different, something that exists at the level of the landscape itself, rather than at the level of what sits on a post in your yard. And the frustrating part is that this missing element is not complicated to provide. It grows, it leafs out in spring, it produces fruit in autumn, and once it is established, it continues providing what blue jays need without any ongoing management, any seasonal restocking, or any recurring cost. What is missing from most suburban yards is a native shrub, specifically one that produces fruit when blue jays need it most, and holds that fruit through the weeks when everything else in the winter landscape has already been consumed. To understand why this matters as much as it does, you need to understand what a blue jay is actually doing during the hardest months of the year, because the popular image of this bird, a loud, bold visitor at a seed station in the summer, is not the full picture. Blue jays are corvids, members of the most cognitively sophisticated family of birds in North American ecology, and their relationship with winter is not defined by what humans put out for them. It is defined by what the landscape itself holds when temperatures drop, ground cover freezes, and the forest strips down to bare branches. A blue jay that has not mapped reliable calorie sources before winter arrives is a blue jay under genuine survival pressure, and the stress of that pressure shows up in its behavior as increased range, longer foraging circuits, and less time in any single location. A yard that appears in that mental map as a reliable winter food source gets treated completely differently, visited more frequently, revisited more persistently, and incorporated into a daily circuit that the bird will maintain for the remainder of its life. What changes a yard from an invisible patch to a mapped location in that winter circuit is not what you put out on a given morning. It is what is growing in the ground. Specifically, it is whether the yard contains plants capable of producing fruit with the nutritional profile a blue jay's body requires during the coldest months, and holding that fruit on the branch long enough to be available when the bird most needs it. This is the hidden cause behind most seasonal blue jay disappearances. The fact that most suburban yards are built from ornamental and non-native plants that were selected for human aesthetic preferences, rather than for wildlife nutritional value, and that these plants either produce no fruit at all, produce fruit that lacks the lipid content cold weather birds require, or drop their fruit early in the autumn when competition from other wildlife is still high, and the need for winter fat reserves has not yet become critical. The result is a yard that looks well maintained, looks like it should attract wildlife, and yet fails the specific biological test that blue jays apply to every location they consider incorporating into their winter territory. The native shrubs that pass that test consistently across the widest range of the eastern and central United States are flowering dogwood and American holly. Neither is exotic. Neither requires specialized horticultural knowledge to establish. Both are available through native plant nurseries across most of their range, and both begin producing meaningful quantities of fruit within a few years of planting from nursery stock. What makes them the right answer to the seasonal disappearance problem is not a general quality of attractiveness to wildlife. It is the specific timing and nutritional content of what they produce, which happens to align with what blue jays need at precisely the moments when they need it most. Flowering dogwood produces clusters of small, bright red drupes that ripen in late summer and early autumn. Their defining nutritional characteristic, the one that matters most for understanding why blue jays prioritize them, is fat content. Dogwood berries contain an exceptionally high proportion of lipid relative to other native fruits, which places them at the top of the energy density hierarchy for birds preparing for winter. A blue jay consuming dogwood berries in September and October is not simply eating because food is available. It is actively building the fat reserves that its metabolism will draw on during overnight temperature drops in January, when the bird cannot forage, cannot generate heat through activity, and must survive on internal reserves alone until morning light allows it to begin moving again. The fat in dogwood berries is not incidental. It is the specific fuel the bird needs in the specific form it can most efficiently use, and a yard with a productive dogwood is a yard that gets mapped as a high-value caloric resource before winter has even begun. American holly, known scientifically as Ilex opaca, fills the gap that dogwood leaves behind. Dogwood berries are valuable, but they do not last. Competition from other wildlife, including migratory species passing through in autumn, strips most dogwood shrubs of their fruit within a few weeks of ripening. Holly operates on a different schedule. Its berries reach full maturity later in the season, and crucially, they do not drop. They hold on the branches through December, through January, through February, and sometimes into March, maintaining their position and visibility, even when the plant is buried to its lower branches under accumulated snow. A holly shrub in full berry production in late January, with red fruit clusters visible against the white of a snow-covered yard, is one of the most conspicuous food signals in the entire winter landscape, and a blue jay that has this shrub on its territorial map does not need to search for it. It goes directly there, knowing the resource will be where it was last time. This is the biological mechanism underneath the title's claim that the birds stay for years. The phrase is accurate, but it requires the right framing to mean something useful rather than something misleading. Blue jays are free animals with large foraging territories, and no single plant traps a bird or compels it to stay in one location. What happens instead is a process of territorial learning and map building. A blue jay that discovers a flowering dogwood and then an American holly on the same property has found something rare in a typical suburban landscape, a location with high calorie value in early autumn and reliable food availability in deep winter. It incorporates this location into the inner circle of its foraging territory, the locations it visits first, and most frequently when food pressure is highest. It returns every autumn and every winter because the resource has been there every year it has checked. And because blue jays live for 7 to 10 years in the wild, that pattern of return can span most of a decade for a single bird. The generational extension of this pattern is the part that creates the strongest version of the year's claim. Young blue jays learn the outlines of productive foraging territory, partly by following adult birds during their juvenile period, observing which locations the adults return to and in what seasons. A property with an established holly and dogwood that has been reliably productive for several years is a property that juvenile birds in the family group will have been brought to and shown. When those juveniles establish their own territories, typically within a range of a mile or so of where they were raised, the property with the known productive shrubs remains on their map. Not every juvenile stays close, but enough do, consistently enough across enough seasons, that a yard with the right native shrubs begins to feel permanently occupied, visited by birds that feel familiar, even when they are the children and grandchildren of the bird you first attracted. The spring dimension of this story is worth addressing because it reveals an aspect of native shrubs that most people never consider when they think about why planting choices matter. When breeding season arrives and blue jays begin nesting, their nutritional priorities shift as dramatically as they shift at the onset of winter, and the direction of the shift surprises most people. Nesting blue jays stop eating mostly seeds and start eating mostly insects because the chicks in the nest cannot develop properly on plant matter. They need protein, and the primary protein source for nestling corvids is caterpillars, large beetles, and similar soft-bodied invertebrates that can be caught, transported to the nest, and consumed by birds too young to crack hard seeds or shells. Native shrubs, including flowering dogwood and American holly, support communities of native insects that ornamental non-native plants typically do not. Many of the caterpillar species that nesting blue jays hunt are larvae of native moth and butterfly species, whose host plants are specific native species. A yard full of ornamental imports may look alive with foliage, but be ecologically nearly empty in terms of the insect life that corvids depend on in spring. Adding even a modest native plant component, a dogwood, a holly, a patch of native sunflowers whose tall, thick stems attract beetles and caterpillars throughout the growing season, begins rebuilding the insect base that nesting birds need. The dogwood you plant for winter does double duty in spring, supporting the insect community that makes nesting viable in the same yard where it provides winter fat reserves. The holly holds its berries through the weeks when the dogwood's spring blooms are just beginning to attract the first native insects. These two shrubs are not replacements for each other. They are complementary pieces of a year-round ecological system, and together they address the two most critical nutritional periods in a blue jay's annual cycle, with native plant material that costs nothing to run once established. The solution, then, is not a new product. It is not a seasonal restocking or a subscription to a birding service. It is two plants, planted once, managed minimally, and allowed to mature into the ecological anchors they are designed by evolution to be. Flowering dogwood for autumn fat and spring insect support. American holly for deep winter reliability. These are the shrubs that convert a yard from a location blue jays pass over into a location they return to across years. And the investment required to plant them is smaller by a significant margin than the cost of the commercial products that promise the same result and cannot deliver it. If you want to keep exploring what real ecological investment in a yard looks like, drop the species or topic you want covered next in the comments. And if this changed how you think about what your yard is actually offering the wildlife around it, give the video a like and subscribe, because there is a lot more of this coming.